It is 10:27 on Tuesday, March 16th, 2021. And I'm calling to order the County Development Committee, requesting please that the clerk please call the roll.
Berman,
Berman here.
Brown,
Here.
Ford,
Here.
Iqbal,
Iqbal present.
Kenyon,
Here.
Wonicky,
Wonicky present.
Fraz,
Ross here.
Caius, Shepro.
Shepro present.
Thank you.
We have a quorum. The first matter before us today are the monthly financials. We have a report on file. Do we have anyone from the Finance Department to address the committee today? Hearing no such response, we will consider that matter concluded and move on to public comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
The minutes.
We should probably approve the minutes
Move from.
from the February 16th meeting. Mr. Fries moves, Mr. Berman seconds. Comments or questions? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown, Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries, minutes stand approved. I just thought the meeting would go faster if I handled every other item on the agenda. Public comment, I have none registered here. Do we have anyone online? Hearing none, then we will move to the building and zoning report. Mr.
Good morning.
Kirkhoff.
I'm happy to report that our department is continuing to work remotely and we're at 100% capacity. Everybody continues to be well, which we're very thankful for. We expect building permit activity to begin to tick up a bit again now with the spring weather coming on, and also anticipate that pools may be a hot item again this season. And with that, we also continue to do the property maintenance and exterior property inspections for the entire county while the health department's working diligently on the current crisis. So we also expect an uptick in calls for potential violations once people get out and walk more and see things in their neighborhood that they're concerned about. So we'll be handling those as well. If any board members receive calls or emails from constituents about anything of a zoning or property maintenance concern, please feel free to forward that to me and we'll address it right away. That's all I have this morning for the building and zoning report.
Thank you. I'd like to comment that I finally took my tour of the remodeled offices up there, and it was a great job of planning and coordination, and I think the place is a lot more going to function a lot better than it certainly did in the past. A lot of plexiglass, but that's life. Zoning petitions, the first being 45, or excuse me, are there any comments or questions of Mr. Van Kerkhoff relative to his report? Hearing none, we'll move to petitions, the first being 4572.
We have a request from the petitioner that this petition be tabled until the April meeting, and staff recommends that the development committee consider honoring that request.
Thank you. May we please have a motion to
will move
continue to the next committee meeting? Ms.
I'll move
Winicky
that.
moves. Do we have a second? Mr. Fries seconds. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky.
Yes.
Approved. Thanks.
Motion carries. The matter is continued. Tabled.
Is it Caius, yes? I vote on that? As ex officio, I'm a member of the committee, I believe, aren't we, Martin?
I'm sorry, Caius.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next before us, we have item 5C, the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance to accommodate adult use cannabis businesses in the county. Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
Sure. Good morning. Blair, if you could put the PDF I sent to you up on the screen. For those who are not in the room, this is a memo I just completed and walked into the meeting. So everybody in the room, I believe, has a copy. If you don't, please let me know. And for board members who are online, it's on the screen. But basically what this reflects is that reporting to the committee last night, the Zoning Board of Appeals held a special meeting in order to receive comments and discuss and make recommendations regarding proposed text amendments to the zoning ordinance regarding adult use cannabis business establishments. So this is going through in parallel with your ordinance to rescind, so that if the ordinance to rescind is passed, you'd have an opportunity in the same board meeting in April to adopt draft text amendments that allow for and provide reasonable regulations as permitted by the state regarding the establishment of those businesses. So the business or the basis for the public hearing discussion last night and what was noticed to the public was the same memo that's in your packet. So that is identical, dated February 25th, which includes, as you saw in your packet, sort of an overview of the reason for the text amendment, some of the policy-related approaches, and then the actual draft text in there. So this was the basis for the public hearing last night. After hearing some comments from the public, which I could characterize as basically being in support of rescinding the ordinance, they didn't really have any specific comments on the text. And then there was also a memo from Camden Township and the Camden Township Planning Commission, which voiced the township's objecting or encouraging the county board not to opt out. But their memo also stated that if the county board does opt in and include adopting these text amendments, they had a question just to make sure that setback requirements related to forest preserves and public parks, as are currently in the draft text, that would cover their township-owned open space. So we're continuing to evaluate that question with our state's attorney's office, but that's potentially a text amendment that could be still added if we felt we needed to tighten that up. The Zoning Board of Appeals felt that the current draft text covered their concern by the fact that it covers forest preserves and public parks. The other speakers basically were in support. I think there actually may have been the same two speakers that were at your county board meeting in support of the county board rescinding the ordinance and allow the businesses. Other than that, the zoning board moved to unanimously recommend the draft text. They did not make any actual proposed changes to the text that's in your packet, and that was before them last night. They did have 4 items that they passed along as comments for the county board and staff to continue to look at. One of their recommendations or comments was that the county board may want to consider not having any setback requirements for transporter businesses. That's basically defined in the state act as being for the transportation of the cannabis plants or products from location to location. McHenry County is among the jurisdictions that don't have any setback requirement for transporter businesses. So that is something that they pointed out perhaps maybe could be eliminated. Their second point was the adult use cannabis advertising definition language. They didn't think that was real clear. We'll continue to review that with the state's attorney's office. The draft text that's actually in our proposed changes and definition is actually verbatim from the state statute. So, well, there may be a difference of opinion as to whether it's clear or not. It is the actual language from the state statute. Number 3 was they had a question of whether the county desires to add additional controls or could prohibit on-site consumption. That's something that's actually regulated by the state in their license process for craft growers. I don't believe there's been a huge surge in that aspect of the business, but that's something that they passed along, and we're pointing that out, and we'll continue to look at that as well. But I don't know that there's really anything the county could do more restrictive or less restrictive than what the state allows for that potential. And then number 4, there was just a question about clarifying the restrictions apply only to indoor growing facilities. There was a discussion on whether this would impact farmers growing products in their fields or if they had the ability to. Aaron Brady is on the line with us as well, but it's my understanding that this act and the licenses for cultivators, growers, or craft growers have to be entirely inside secured and locked facilities. So that would not impact farmers who are growing hemp or other types of cannabis products, also licensed by the state, but it's not under this narrow coverage of the Adult Use Cannabis Act. I'm happy to answer any questions. I want to thank Erin Brady for her tireless following staff and working with us on this issue. She is on the phone, so either one of us could answer any questions regarding the draft text, those 4 comments. So I'll turn it over back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. To enable discussion here, I'd like to have a motion for approval. Mr. Kenyon moves, Mr. Berman seconds. Mr. Fries.
Mr. Van Kerkhoff, I just want to be sure I understand. So like, under item C1, we have an ordinance to vote on today, I assume. But then you just presented those 4 items that the ZBA recommended be included. So are those 4 items part of the ordinance we're voting on today?
No, thank you for that clarification. The zoning board did not go as far as make any amendments to the draft text. So they are recommending the draft text as in the draft that they received and what's in your packet, and would be attachment A in the ordinance that's before you this morning. With that, they basically passed along those 4 items as comments or items that they're pointing out that they had some questions about. They didn't feel strongly enough or have a consensus on to make any changes, but they felt that in their role as your ZBA to pass along that those were 4 areas that they thought maybe needed further attention.
Okay, so I guess I'm just not clear then. Could we make a motion? We can't make a motion to include those at this point, right? That would have to be another amendment or?
Yes, I think, and Aaron's on the phone as well, but in discussing this, our suggestion this morning would be that the committee move the draft text. If there's any items in the draft text that you want to amend at your meeting this morning, you certainly could do that. Otherwise, you could pass it as it is drafted and direct staff to continue to work with the state's attorney's office on all or none of those 4 points. And those would then have to be amended at the executive committee or county board meeting.
Mr. Chairman, Shepro, question?
Mr. Shepro.
Yeah, why would the committee not be able to amend the draft ordinance to include the 4 items? It's on the agenda for action. You don't have to have every amendment on it, or you'd never be able to vote on an amendment.
Yeah, my apologies, Mr. Shepro. I didn't mean to imply that the development committee could not make any amendments to the draft text as part of your meeting this morning. You certainly can do that. I was mainly trying to point out that to Mr. Fraz that the zoning board did not actually suggest any specific text amendments.
I understand, but I was thinking that, that it could certainly be discussed as if, and either, I would think, either amended or at least forwarded with the thoughts of the committee as to whether they should be included before it gets to exec.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Winicki.
That's a good segue into what Mr. Frost was just talking about. So I would like to add as a 5th amendment the request by Campton Township, which says if the if the county is in agreement with granting Campton Township request for adding open spaces setbacks. So I would like to make that number 5.
perhaps let me make a comment to
Uh-huh.
if I understand these, and we've all seen them this morning, okay, but as if I understand the way that Mr. Van Kerkhoff has explained them, the definition, which they have raised an issue about, is identical to that in the state statute. The concept of on-site consumption is also heavily regulated by state statute. And I believe we have been assured that indoor growing facilities will not in any way get in the way of other agricultural activities. My only thought being that, and I believe that the state's attorney has said that, has confirmed that your concern, which is a valid concern, is that is addressed by the language that's in there. And what I would like to do this morning is to go again, discuss these four, but I just, my gut, my one person opinion is, if we have a definition in the state statute, I would just as soon piggyback on the state statute and not try to reinvent, the law or the statute in Illinois and Kane County. I see the potential for confusion down the line and conflict between us and the state. When I look at this, it looks like like most of these are matters of form, with the exception of confirming that Barb's concern on behalf of Campton Township is addressed, and do we want to eliminate the setback requirements for transporters? It seems to me that the rest of these issues are, again, one person's opinion. I would like to have the language sit as it is, and my opinion now has been offered. So,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, can I continue for a moment?
oh, I'm sorry, Barb, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay, Ken. So I just received this morning, and that's why I'm a little green on it, and no pun intended with St. Patrick's Day. But what did you say to me about setbacks? It involves forest preserves, correct, and park districts? Is that what you
Sure.
said?
So in the proposed definitions for adult use cannabis setbacks, that's in that was part of the draft text.
Uh-huh.
There are setback requirements for facilities from the property line of a pre-existing forest preserve, public park, or place of worship. So, and Aaron Brady is on the line as well, but staff's opinion is that a township open space would easily fall into either one of those categories, pre-existing forest preserve or a public park. But if it was felt that, there was a potential loophole, that could also be, text could be added that maybe specifically says township-owned open space, which would apply to Campton Township and Dundee Township as well, since they also have a township open space program. But Aaron Brady's on the line if you want to.
I'd strongly urge us to add that. I think the issue is there are so many few township open space programs in the state of Illinois that it may have been overlooked. I believe there's only 5 townships that have open space programs, and it's definitely for public use, and it's not technically a park. It's categorized as township open space. So I strongly suggest that this be added to the ordinance, or the maybe as number 5, or wherever it would fit in the best, I guess.
Well, let's, at the risk of sounding flippant, let's just do it. I mean, it all it does in the worst case scenario is to repeat something that the state's attorney says is already there. And it may, your point may be totally appropriate. So
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Shepro.
I was about to say that you pointed out a few minutes ago, I have seen many efforts over the years where a county attempts, or a municipality attempts, to track language in the state statute. And it's never, to me, a good idea to try to do that, because if the intent is to be parallel to the state statute, the state statutes have a nasty way of changing. and often obsolete or inconsistent language remains in the local ordinances. So I guess my suggestion is that I would agree with your comment. If we are convinced that the state statute takes care of it, I think we perhaps ought not to try to parallel that language because it's already there.
Now, I'll argue that that language is not there specifically for township open space.
And you may be correct on that, in which case that would be a good reason to depart from what I just said.
Let's, so that we have some order to the discussion, let's note that as number one. The four items, first off, were elements of conversation that the zoning board left with us to continue. So the way I read the situation thus far is that we have one issue before us today that would mandate a possible objection, and that is the inclusion of the term township open space as expanding or clarifying the term of forest preserve or public park. So that would be item number one. What other items relative to those four or any other considerations does the committee have to discuss?
Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry, who's asking for permission to speak?
Hi, Mr. Chairman, this is Maulik Pal.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I would like to move to adopt the first item, which says eliminate the setback requirement for transporters. Unless it is in the statute, we don't need to add it. We don't need to have a limitation or setback requirement.
Okay, so we now have a second item relative to the four or otherwise to discuss. Let's discuss that as part of today's conversation. Are there any comments to Mr. Iqbal's suggestion?
Mr. Chairman, Ford,
Mr. Ford?
in my experience of doing any type of development, when you start eliminating any type of setbacks, there's a lot that takes place when it comes to trying to regulate certain things. Also, are we just staying on this one subject for now?
Which subject?
The setbacks.
Yeah, sure. We're on setbacks.
Okay,
And
that's
floor.
okay. That's my comment. Setback. I would disagree with taking out the setbacks requirements.
Let me make a statement or ask a question of Mr. Van Kerkhoff. I believe that all that this setback discussion bears upon not the general issue of setbacks required for trucking operations or the like, but only the unique setback requirements that would exist relative to cannabis. We would still have our normal zoning restrictions, and would we still have our normal zoning restrictions and controls in place?
Yes, that's correct. And in that table on the setbacks for distances of the types of business from other types of land uses, those are distances that they need to be away from a public park or from a place of worship or whatever. So it's more of a locational restriction so that you don't get one of these businesses right next to one of these other land uses. And the basic categories are schools, residences, and public spaces and places of worship.
Mr. Ford, does that address your concern, or does your concern remain?
My concern remains.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman, let me.
I was going to raise a point of order, perhaps. I heard Mr. Iqbal make a motion. Was there a second to that motion?
Well, I exercised perhaps inappropriate discretion, thinking that I wanted to find out what issues, Mr. Shepro, we had before us, and then order the concept of amendments. We can.
I think that's appropriate, Mr. Chairman. I withdraw.
Thank you. Any other comments or suggestions related either to these four items or discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Ford?
yes. usually I know like with alcohol, there's a comment about schools in the I don't know if this in the state statute or somewhere else about what is the relationship to schools.
And that is present. Mr. Van Kerkhoff, would you address that, please?
Sure, that is addressed in those business establishment setbacks that are in the definitions of the draft text. So one category of setbacks is facilities cannot be located with X number of feet from a pre-existing public or private nursery school, preschool, primary,
Okay.
secondary school, or daycare center.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Berman?
we have the ability to set the distance and those setbacks. I know that's one thing that we could do if we don't like the what the state has said. So,
Mr. Chairman, this is Maurice Paul.
Wait. I think that was intended as a question for Mr. Van Kerkhoff.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the draft text that's before you proposes are this table. It's on page 5 of the memo that's in your packet dated February 25th. And there's a definition that's would be added to the zoning ordinance for adult use business establishment setbacks, and a table of the types of businesses and the distances from those 3 categories of other land uses. And those are sort of safe haven setbacks. They were floated back in 2019 when all the communities had the ability to opt in or opt out. Many municipalities and several counties have adopted these. In the memo earlier, there's a chart. We did a comparison of the setbacks that have been adopted by other counties. Some of them have dropped the setback requirements or changed them a little bit. Some have made them more restrictive. This is sort of what is, I guess, staff would term as being safe haven. They haven't really been challenged or even, to our knowledge, complained about by the cannabis business industry as being overly restrictive.
Thank you. Ms. Gums has been patiently waiting for a chance to speak. Ms. Gums, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to clarify in reference to Commissioner Ford's setback question. In the zoning meeting last night, number 1, the setback requirement for transporters be eliminated. While discussing that topic at the meeting last night, it was relevant only to the trucking companies so that they would not be penalized should they be using their trucks to pick up product from point A and taking it to point B. All of the other setbacks were to be, as I understood it, to remain in effect. This was specific to the transporters only, to eliminate that setback. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that was the direction of the conversation last night, so that they would not be penalized for doing so.
Thank you. There was someone else online that asked to speak. I thought.
Erin Brady has her hand up.
Erin Brady.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to chime in to clarify a little bit on the setbacks when we're talking about items coming from state law. The law that we're working with today, which was passed in 2019, is the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. And that act allows the county to enact reasonable zoning regulations for cannabis business establishments. It doesn't say what setbacks should be for these types of businesses. However, and what Mark has explained, but I want to be clear, the proposed setbacks, some of those come from a different statute regulating cannabis, which is the compassionate use of cannabis, medical cannabis, which has been on the books for several years. So the two kind of overlap in terms of placement and the types of places where there should be setbacks from. But I want to make sure everybody understands the distinction and where those two are coming from.
Thank you. Ms. Winicki?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on record and say that since Campton Township has nearly 1,500 acres of open space, I would like to request the Development Department to continue working with Campton Township and possibly Dundee Township, who also has an open space program regarding the setbacks, and come to some kind of resolution and possibly amend that ordinance just to add township open space parcels. That's my request.
Okay. Any other comments, Mr. Fries?
Could we move this forward then? With
Well, yeah,
the-
what my
Well-
plan is to get the comments, and then these are all possible amendments to we've already moved and seconded the approval of the ordinance as originally proposed. These would all be, these two items that I have thus far would be possible amendments, which we would then vote on separately and either include or not include.
So you're going to move through all four? Or
But
you-
we've already moved the ordinance.
Right.
Then I would move to amend each of these separate items to know that they are or not included in that ordinance as we give it to the executive committee.
I would be prepared to move that we include all four plus what we would call number 5, which is the Campton Amendment.
Well, the only, and if that's the case, well, I guess what, let's continue in the route we followed, and if it ends up that we want all 4 included, we can do so. But we have 2 items thus far of those 4 or otherwise that we've been requested to put in as proposed amendments to the ordinance as drafted. Mr. Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman Martin. I think your comment was correct that there's really only 2 things that would be something to add as an amendment: the transporter setbacks, and then Ms. Wonicki's request to include the language. Because the other 3, they're sort of just instructions for staff in a sense to review or to clarify things. And I can address some of these really quickly. The cannabis advertising, these aren't going to be dispensaries in unincorporated areas. So the advertising is to be very minimal, industrial park type, maybe not even a sign on the outside of the building, because signs cost money. On-site consumption is the same thing. These aren't going to be dispensaries, so there isn't going to be the option for a grow operation to have people legally consuming the product. And then the restrictions are the indoor growing. We've already established that it only relates to indoor growing facilities. That's all that's allowable under the law. So just my perspective, not as a member of the committee, I think the transporter setbacks and the open space language are the only 2 relevant amendments to make.
Thank you. Other comments, Madam Chairman?
Oh, thank you. If I just may clarify, once this gets approved, just a point of correction on my understanding, that this will be all cannabis-related businesses, including distribution. So they possibly, there could be in Campton Township, if approved, there could be a dispensary, whether it be medical or recreational. So it would include all of the above, because we're approving the whole portfolio of opportunities for cannabis-related businesses. So Dundee Township could approve it, that they would like to have such a facility, but it would have to be presented and licensed by the state of Illinois and then approved.
Well, I think Barb's concern was more setbacks and making certain that we
The
treated them.
setbacks,
that-
yes.
I was responding to Mr. Sanchez that we believe that it's most likely going to be grow centers
All right.
and scientific research centers rather than the dispensaries.
Dispensary.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chair, could we get Aaron Brady's opinion on the language as Ms. Wolnick has brought up, for some clarification on that from the state's attorney's office?
Do you hear that, Aaron?
Yeah, I did. I think regarding open space.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Ms. Winicki, based on what I'm hearing you say, I think it's probably a prudent idea for the motion to be made to amend to include open space within those setback definitions, then to propose what that setback would be and then take it up for a vote. Mr. Chairman, when it's time. I understand that you wanted to take all of those together.
Okay, any other comments or changes or discussion? All right, then what I show before us is two possible amendments to the ordinance as we have voted, as we have moved and seconded for approval. The first being to clarify, and I'm going to ask for the appropriate language, Mark, from you, the addition of the term open space to the definitions of park and forest preserve. Is that sufficient?
Yes, I can read that portion. So under the setback from other uses, category number 3 currently reads, facility may not be located with blank feet, which refers back to the table, of the property line of a pre-existing forest preserve, public park, or place of worship. So I think the appropriate text amendment to this portion to address that concern would be to insert after pre-existing forest preserve and before public park, the phrase township-owned open space. And I think Aaron Brady can, chime in, but I think that would add that to that list that's all in that setback category number 3.
Okay, thank you. Barb, is that your motion?
Yes, yes, that's perfect.
Do we have a second? Mr. Fries seconds. Do we have comments or questions as to that amendment? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky,
Yes,
Caius.
Caius, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. The second possible amendment would be the elimination of setbacks unique to the transporting, I think it was just the relative to cannabis transporters, the result of which would be that the normal considerations of trucking operations and the like would remain in place. So the proposed motion in front of us would be to eliminate the setbacks uniquely established in the proposed ordinance as relate to transporters. Does anyone want to make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Berman makes it. Is there a second?
Iqbal,
Mr. Iqbal seconds. Now, discussion on that.
So I'm sorry, Fries speaking, the motion is to leave that in or to do?
The
what?
motion would be to strike the provisions uniquely establishing setbacks as relates to cannabis operations.
Okay,
The effect of which would be that our normal zoning restrictions would remain in place and would control the usage of the property. If someone's intending to speak, we can't hear you, and I haven't had a chance to address you.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, now, can we have a motion? Oh, Mr. Caius, I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman, could I get Ms. Brady to explain again? It seems to me that we're getting where we could be really complicating the difference, the restrictions that we're restricting regular transport versus cannabis transport. Is it too cloudy whether the truck is actually handling corn and cannabis or some other product? I'm a little confused on that.
Brady, do you want to discuss that?
So under the Cannabis Control Act, in order to be licensed as a cannabis transporter, all of that is regulated by the state. And I don't know off the top of my head whether transporters are allowed to commingle with other goods. That's something I could certainly look up and share with you. but they are required to go through a separate rigorous application and licensure process with the state.
And am I fair in the conclusion that if we rely upon our normal setbacks and the state establishes something more severe, the states will govern? I
The
mean,
states will govern, and we're not, as I mentioned earlier, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act allows broad discretion to the county and says that the county can regulate, enact reasonable zoning regulations. But it does say that we cannot regulate more strictly than the state does. That's another item to keep in mind.
thank you, Mr. Fries.
And Mark, maybe you can clarify this because you were at the meeting last night, but I'm just guessing that the ZBA is thinking in terms of just a general trucking company. If one of their customers happens to be a cannabis firm, it's going to mess up their zoning where, they may have been in a building, an industrial park for 30 years. And if they start hauling, even if they never bring it back to their base, if one of the trucks goes out and hauls cannabis between point A and point B and comes back, is that what this is all about?
Yeah, I think that was their concern. I don't know that anyone is going to particularly, request for rezoning for a trucking business and parking yard for trucks just for transporting cannabis. It's probably is more likely that it'd be a pre-existing trucking company that wants to get that special license from the state to do so. And I think the zoning board was concerned that that might prohibit an existing business from getting a state license if we had this setback requirement.
I would agree with their reasoning, and this would actually require new zoning in every town to allow a transport business. And, you may have to move down the street if you're going to want to do that. So I think this is a reasonable request.
Also to help maybe clarify, Blair, can you put from the packet that was with the agenda under this item, there's the ordinance and then my memo. You scroll down to page 5 of my memo after this. Keep going. Okay, now keep going. Okay, right there. So this is the actual part of the proposed draft text that has the setbacks, and then you see that table. Scroll, get the top, there you go. So at the very top of that page, that's basically where most of this discussion has focused on. There's a chart that has the type of businesses and then the different categories of land uses for setbacks. So generally what the zoning board was recommending the county board take a look at, and you're discussing it right now, is whether or not those distances under that bottom line transporters of 1,500 feet, 250 feet, and 1,500 feet, that those should all be dropped to 0, so that there would be no setback requirements from any of those 3 categories of land uses for transporters. And that's basically, if that helps you visualize the how that works with the chart, that would be amended for those 3 numbers to be 0.
I think, Drew, your point is well taken. We don't, somebody has some incidental work. We don't want to have the nuance of, have they converted their property and do they have to move down the block because they don't maintain the distance? So do we have any other discussion on this proposed amendment to the ordinance? Hearing none, then would the clerk please call the roll, and the vote, if in favor, would strike the unique provisions in the ordinance related to transporters.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Muniki,
Yes.
Caius.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr.
Motion
Chairman, I got a
carries.
point of order. Just would like to ask the secretary, now I haven't been called for my vote. I thought we clarified that ex officio transportation voted.
I'm not a parliamentary expert, but I believe that the only ex officio member who can't vote except for a tie is the vice chairman of the board,
That would be correct.
says the vice chairman of the board.
So I should vote. I should be voting.
You should vote.
So my vote
Yes.
is yes, and on the previous two votes, I wasn't called, they're both yes.
Okay, I apologize.
So
Okay,
we've been
thank
trying to
you. We
clarify
have,
that for years.
we have thus far a motion before us with two amendments. Are there any other, is there any other discussion or comment before we call a vote on the motion as, on the ordinance as amended? Hearing none, then would the clerk please call the roll?
What are we voting on? I'm sorry.
The original motion as amended.
Berman,
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Winnicke,
I'm sorry, what are we voting on right now?
On the recommended ordinance with the two amendments attached.
Oh, okay, yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Fries.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you all for a good discussion. Item 6, planning and special projects.
Thank you. You have in your packet just a summary of the activities of our planning division team. Most of their work falls under the auspices of other county board committees, agriculture, jobs, and energy and environmental. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have. I will let you know we have for round 3 of our agricultural growers grant program that we have 7 new applicants that have come in. So the 3rd round has been well worth it, and you can see who those are on Thursday if you attend Agriculture Committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions of Mr. Van Kerkhoff? Ms. Winnicke?
Can I just make a request that we get an update on farmland protection maybe next month?
Sure, we can prepare that for Agriculture Committee. If you'd like it to have something specific for Development Committee, I can work with Chairman Martin on that as well.
Yeah, that would be great. See where we're at and how many acres we have so far, and yep.
Sure, we can send that out to you, that information as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Items 7, 8, and 9, Ms.
We have no items this month.
Thank you. Mr. Berger, do we have anything from community reinvestment?
Good morning, Chairman Martin. We do not have any items for you this morning. I just want to let you know that our Community Development Division is kind of laser focused right now on closing out your Coronavirus Relief Fund Business Grant Program Round 2 and turning our attention to launching your Emergency Rental Assistance Program through the Illinois Housing Development Authority.
Thank you very much for that report, and thank you very much for the extraordinary effort that you and your department are going through to conclude what we hope to be a once-in-a-lifetime
May not.
problem and disbursement.
Yes, we hope so too. Thank you. You're welcome.
That's probably the understatement of your day, but
to be sure.
We have no Settlers Hill update. Do we have any new business, Mr. Fries?
I just, I had talked to Mark briefly about, with COVID hopefully winding down and the summer approaching, we're going to be getting applications for gathering permits. And I understand we have to kind of review that and come up with a new policy. So I guess I'm just encouraging that we get some guidelines in place and definitely differentiate between indoor gatherings and outdoor gatherings. But I imagine those are going to start coming in, and we should have that reviewed and have a policy in place.
Do we do that? Who has jurisdiction over that, or do we?
Sure. So the county board office, actually, and the Madam Chairman signed the permits for special events and fireworks since about 2012. The development department has handled those permits administratively. So we take in the applications, we route the applications to other departments, the sheriff, health department, in particular, our big partners on reviewing the applications and then recommending to the county board chair for issuance of those permits. In 2020, we did not issue any permits for gatherings because they're basically the county's permit threshold is 100 or more for private events, 250 or more for large events. And so last year, the allowed guidelines from the state never exceeded 50. So we are at a point where we're still at 50, but that could change with the good things happening. So we're beginning to get inquiries about people wanting to hold outdoor weddings and those kinds of things in terms of processing those. So our plan is to, follow those guidelines closely, especially work with our health department, as they would be involved in reviewing, as they always are, those permits, and making recommendations on how we do so to permit those safely. So something I'm working with Madam Chairman on and the health department on. Obviously, they've got other things on their plate as well. But that's something we're looking at. I appreciate, Drew, you bringing that to our attention, because I think people are going to be eager to do that again, and we want to be ready for when the threshold goes over 100 once again.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Brown?
I've got a question, and maybe Mark could answer this. Does the county have a list of what TIF developments are expiring when throughout the county, and to what effect that will have on the revenues that will be increased for the county?
That's a good question. Mark Armstrong has been sort of the county's in-house representative for TIF district matters. I don't know if he has that type of a database, or whether that's something through the tax extension they would have knowledge of that. But I can pass that question along on to Mark and see what information is out there.
Thank you. Anything else? Hearing nothing, I would entertain a motion, please, to place our reports on file.
Caius moves.
Ford moves.
Mr. Caius moves, Mr. Ford seconds. Clerk, please call the roll.
Berman, yes.
Brown,
Yes.
Ford,
Yes.
Iqbal,
Iqbal, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Wonicky,
Yes.
Caius,
Caius, yes.
Fraz.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Reports are on file. May we please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Mr. Kenyon moves, Ms. Wonicky seconds. All in favor of adjournment signify please by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign.